Welcome to my podcast.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are putting a highly focused, brilliant little excerpt on the table today.
Yeah, it's a really great one.
It's taken from a source called A Comprehensive Guide to Spanish Quantifiers. And the mission for this deep dive is to basically demystify how the Spanish language categorizes the tools we use to measure, to scale, and to focus concepts. We are breaking down this specific linguistic taxonomy.
Right.
You know, when you look at a biological taxonomy chart, those intricate branching trees dividing life into kingdom, phylum, class, order, all the way down to species, there is an undeniable satisfaction to it, right? I mean, you look at a wolf and a domestic dog, and the chart explicitly shows you exactly where they're related and where they diverge. It's like a map of biological reality.
It creates order out of what is essentially a chaotic natural world.
Exactly.
But with language, we rarely afford it that same level of structural respect. We tend to view our daily speech as just this giant, messy bucket of vocabulary.
Right, just grabbing words.
Yeah, we throw words together based on feeling, just to get the result we want, rarely stopping to look at the invisible taxonomy governing how those words actually operate under the surface.
Which is exactly why this source is so refreshing. And I want to emphasize right up front, whether you are actively studying Spanish, or maybe you're just a linguistics nerd, or if you just love understanding how human thought is organized, this deep dive is for you.
Definitely.
We're going to get a masterclass in this specific intricate grammatical framework without getting bogged down in impenetrable jargon. Because treating grammar like a dry data set is really a disservice to what it actually is.
Yeah, it really is.
We are basically looking at the biological taxonomy of how we shape reality through language.
And the beauty of this text is that it completely strips away the conversational fluff. It just hands us the raw architectural blueprint of how Spanish handles the very concepts of amount, degree, and inclusion. Every word we are going to discuss today falls into a very deliberate category based entirely on its fundamental function. They're like the gears turning in the background of every sentence involving measurement.
So to understand how we measure things in this language, we really have to start at the foundational level. The guide calls this overarching baseline category quantificadores propios, which translates roughly to proper quantifiers.
Yeah, and think of proper here in the sense of inherent or native.
Okay.
The propios are the words whose native built-in job is simply to quantify a noun directly. If you put them in a sentence, they are immediately looking for something to measure.
And the guide immediately breaks this propios category down into subcategories. The very first one is exactly what you would expect to see when you talk about measuring. It's numerales, cardinales, y ordinales. So cardinal and ordinal numerals.
Which represents the most rigid mathematical form of measurement in human communication.
Right.
1, 2, 3, the cardinals. First, second, third, the ordinals. You say tres libros, 3 books, and there's zero ambiguity about the amount sitting on the table.
Right, it's a fixed point on a ruler. But the guide doesn't stay in that rigid mathematical space for long. It moves right into the second subcategory of these proper quantifiers, which it labels no universales affirmativos.
Non-universal affirmatives.
Exactly. And it lists some incredibly common words here. We've got poco, which is little, mucho for much or a lot, bastante meaning quite a lot or enough, otro for another, and demasiado, which is too much.
And those are absolute heavy lifters in everyday Spanish conversation.
Oh, totally.
I mean, you literally cannot get through a single day without using them.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I actually have a bone to pick with this specific terminology.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Calling words like mucho or bastante a non-universal affirmative feels like, I don't know, academic overkill.
I can see that.
It sounds like a linguist just trying to justify their PhD. Why not just call them relatives or subjective amounts? Does that label simply mean they represent relative degrees rather than absolute totalities?
Yeah.
I mean, if I say tengo mucho trabajo, I have a lot of work. I'm affirming I have a lot, but I clearly don't have all the work in the world.
Right. And I totally see why you'd think the terminology is inflated, but it actually maps a very specific, necessary logical boundary.
Okay.
To understand why linguists fiercely defend the term non-universal, you have to look at the immediate contrast.
The next category.
Exactly. The very next category the text provides is the universals. And the source explicitly notes that this category contains the word to do, meaning all or everything.
Ah, okay. So the category name only makes sense because it's defining itself against to do.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the guide is demonstrating a deep philosophical elegance in how Spanish structures reality. It's separating the absolute to-do, the universal totality, from the relative.
Oh,
Yeah. Take your example. Tengo mucho trabajo. Mucho is entirely dependent on context. Your a lot of work might take 2 hours.
right.
My a lot of work might take a week. Bastante is completely subjective, too. What is enough food for you might not be enough for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But todo, if you say tengo todo el trabajo, I have all the work that leaves literally no room for interpretation. You have enclosed the entire universe of that noun.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. The taxonomy requires that stark boundary. And actually, that brings up the word otro, meaning another, which is sitting in that non-universal list right alongside mucho and poco.
Yeah.
Which is funny because I wouldn't have naturally grouped another with a lot. But looking at the mechanics of it, it fits perfectly.
It really does.
It isn't all, but it is adding a relative unit to whatever you are talking about. You are affirming that there is more, but you're stopping short of claiming the whole universe of that thing.
Right. It affirms existence and has quantity. If you ask for otro café, another coffee, you are quantifying the coffee affirmatively, but you aren't asking for todo el café, like all the coffee in the cafe. The boundary remains completely intact.
Which sets up a very natural question. If todo, the universal quantifier, represents an absolute maximum ceiling, how does this linguistic system handle the absolute floor?
Yeah, and this raises an important question about how we visualize the edges of a language. If you have the absolute ceiling of all, logic dictates, you must have a category for the absolute void.
And the source delivers on that. It introduces the negativos, the negatives category. And the words it lists here are nada, meaning nothing, and nadi, meaning nobody. And right alongside those, it introduces another distinct category called gradativos, the gradatives. This group includes más, meaning more, menos meaning less, tan for so, and tanto for so much.
Let's hold on those negatives for a second because nada and nadi function as total linguistic eradicators.
Eradicators, I like that.
Yeah. They don't mean a microscopic amount. They mean the absence of the noun entirely. In Spanish, you often see this reinforced through syntax, where you pair a negative verb with these quantifiers to ensure the void is absolute.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you look at the numerals, or the universals like todo, or the negatives like nada, they all function like a digital scale.
Okay, a digital scale.
Right. You step on it, and it gives you a fixed absolute reading of a state. It is nothing, or it is exactly 3. But the gradativos, the gradatives like más and menos, they act completely differently. They operate more like a sliding dimmer switch on a light in your dining room.
Oh, a dimmer switch is the perfect mechanism to describe them. They represent a scalable degree, not a static destination.
Right, because you aren't saying the room is pitch black, which would be nada, and you aren't saying the room is brightly illuminated by the sun, which would be to do.
Exactly.
You are taking the light from wherever it currently sits, and you are just turning the dial. You slide it up with más, or you slide it down with menos.
And linguistically, you can see how this constraint plays out in Spanish grammar. You cannot combine a dimmer switch with an absolute state.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, you can't say más todo, more all. That breaks the internal logic of the taxonomy.
Oh, sure.
All is already at the maximum limit. There's literally no room to slide the dimmer switch higher. But you can say más agua, more water, or menos inteligente, less intelligent. The gradatives act as multipliers or scalars for nouns and adjectives that actually have room to slide.
That is so cool. And the words tan and tanto do the exact same thing just by establishing a comparative scale. Tanto means so much. So you are sliding the dimmer switch up to match a specific understood level of intensity.
Yeah. Synthesizing all of this, we have to remember the umbrella we are currently standing under. Everything we have discussed up to this point, the rigid mathematical numbers, the subjective mucho, the absolute ceiling of todo, the absolute void of nada, and the sliding dimmer switches of más and menos.
Right.
They all belong to that foundational quantificadores propios category.
Despite the vast differences in how they operate, their core mechanism is the same. They're the direct measuring tapes of the Spanish language.
Yeah.
If you put a noun or an adjective next to them, their native purpose is to tell you the size, volume, amount, or intensity of that word.
They measure the tangible or abstract weight of the things in the sentence, but of course human communication requires far more sophistication than just weighing things on a scale.
It does. And this is where the guide makes a massive, fascinating pivot. We have seen how the taxonomy categorizes direct measurements, but then the text introduces a completely different, almost psychological layer of quantification. It moves entirely away from simply measuring the volume of an object.
Yeah, this is where we leave the realm of measuring cups and step into the realm of context.
The source introduces a second major overarching category, distinct from the propios. It calls this new branch quantificadores focales or presuposicionales, so focal or presuppositional quantifiers. And the specific subcategory it highlights here are the incluyentes, the inclusives. The two words featured in this category are también, meaning also or too, and tampoco, meaning neither or not either.
And this usually trips people up when they first encounter linguistic taxonomies.
So what does this all mean? Because I have to be honest, when I first looked at this section of the source, I was genuinely confused.
It's totally understandable.
How do words like también and tampoco fit into a guide about quantifiers? If I say in Spanish, yo también voy, I am going too. I'm not counting anything. I'm not sliding a scale like más, and I'm not establishing an absolute like todo. Why are these categorized as quantifiers at all?
What's fascinating here is the subtle distinction the source makes about what it actually means to quantify. You are right. También does not measure the literal volume of the noun. It doesn't mean you have 3 apples.
Right.
But these words do execute a mathematical function. They quantify inclusion based on a presupposed context.
A presupposed context. Hence the highly specific name, presuposicionales.
Exactly. Let's break down the mechanics of your example. Yo también voy. If you walk into an empty room, pick up a phone, call a stranger, and just say, I'm going to, the sentence fails.
Completely fails.
Structurally, grammatically, logically, it collapses.
The stranger would have absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Going to where? With who?
Right. The communication breaks down entirely because the math of the sentence has a missing variable. The word también inherently relies on an invisible, presupposed list that already exists in the ether between the speaker and the listener.
Oh, wow.
It relies on the mutual background knowledge that someone else, maybe your friend, your sister, is already going to the party. What también does is take that existing, unstated list of people, and it mathematically adds you to it. It quantifies your inclusion in the group.
Wow. So it is measuring, but it isn't measuring the subject itself. It's measuring whether the subject is added to an existing implied set.
Yes, and tampoco does the exact same thing, just mapping to a negative set.
Okay.
If someone says, no me gusta la película, I don't like the movie, and you reply, a mí tampoco, me neither, you aren't measuring the amount of your dislike. You are quantifying your inclusion on the list of people who dislike the film. You are mathematically adding yourself to a negative framework.
That completely redefines how we think about the concept of quantity. It highlights how this linguistic framework categorizes the focus of a sentence and the shared psychological background between two speakers as a literal form of quantifying.
The propios measure the things in the room. The focales measure how the people in the room relate to the unstated reality around them.
That's a great way to put it.
It is a heavier cognitive load because it requires mutual understanding before the word is even spoken.
Which is such a profound shift from where we started with simple numbers. You know, when we look back at the journey we've taken through this specific text, it distills down into an incredibly clear, elegant taxonomy.
It really does.
The core takeaway here is that this grammatical guide fundamentally splits Spanish quantifiers into 2 main philosophical camps.
It creates a beautiful bifurcation of how we process reality.
Right. On one branch of the tree, you have the propios. They handle the heavy lifting of direct measurement. And as we explored, they range from the rigid mathematical numbers and the numerals to the subjective relative measures like poco and mucho.
Yeah.
They give us the absolute universal ceiling of todo, the absolute negative void of nada, and those sliding dimmer switches, the gradables like más and menos.
They give us the tangible boundaries of amount and degree.
And then on a completely separate branch of this taxonomy, you have the focales or presuposicionales. These deal entirely with contextual inclusion. There are words like también and tampoco that act as mathematical additions to an invisible, unspoken list.
And for you listening right now, the real application of this deep dive isn't just about, passing a grammar test.
No, definitely not.
The next time you encounter these words, whether you are reading a Spanish article, trying to speak the language, or just thinking about how meaning translates across cultures, remember that you aren't just memorizing a random chaotic bucket of vocabulary.
You are actively navigating a highly organized biological system of thought. You are deliberately choosing between fixed scales, absolute universals, subjective measures, and focal points of inclusion. Every time you speak, you are using this invisible taxonomy to construct reality.
You are selecting the exact right cognitive mechanism for the exact right scenario.
Which leaves me with one final provocative thought based on what this taxonomy has revealed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
If words grouped under the presuppositionales, branch words like también and tampoco, are categorized entirely by how they rely on a presupposed focus, like if their very grammatical survival requires an invisible list to exist in the air between two people, it makes you wonder how much of our everyday language, in any tongue, actually relies on that invisible, unspoken background context. How much of what we communicate every single day relies on a foundation that a listener just has to know before the conversation even begins.
We truly only speak the tip of the iceberg. The rest is just mutual understanding.
We really do. It makes you realize that when we look at that grand taxonomy of language, the most fascinating parts aren't always the words written on the page.
Right.
The most fascinating parts might just be the empty, unstated spaces connecting them. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.